Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to the release of Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, the inside story of how a team of renegades broke rules, shattered barriers, and launched a drone warfare revolution, a new book on the early days of the remotely piloted aircraft revolution. The book is the story behind the origins of the armed Predator program and the dawn of uninhabited warfare. A first account told by an Air Force team leader and a CIA team leader, Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, takes readers into the back offices and secret government hangars where the robotic revolution went from a mad scientist idea to a pivotal part of global air power. The book was written by Alec Bierbauer, Mark Cooter, and Michael Marks. Alex spent a lifetime conducting counterterrorism and counterintelligence operations in venues ranging from Bosnia to Yemen to Afghanistan. He was a CIA case officer with an emphasis on integrating emerging technologies into high-risk special programs, and he became the CIA's point man in the development of the Predator program. Mark's a retired Air Force colonel. In his 28-year career, he served as an intel officer with ops experience in Desert Storm, the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya ops. Mark was involved in Predator ops near the inception in Bosnia through Joint Air Force and CIA operations in Afghanistan and beyond. Last but not least, Michael's worked around the world within the U.S. intel and special ops community, a career that stretches from the jungles of Nicaragua to the mountains of Afghanistan. He's also a best-selling author whose books have been adopted by venues such as the FBI Academy and the Army Asymmetric Warfare Group. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us this morning. It's also worth noting here that both Alec and Mark received the National Intelligence Defense Service Medal for their service with this program. So with that, gentlemen, welcome, and we'll start with a synopsis of the book, followed by your short remarks, and then we'll move into questions and answers. So over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, General Deptula, and thanks to the Mitchell staff, especially Camilla Gunsinger. She's a rock star. It's our honor to have this event be the kickoff for our effort. Sir, I know you've been busy with your Desert Storm events, so thanks for taking the time to set this up. To all the attendees, thanks for taking the time from your busy day to join us here. We are humbled. We hope you'll find the next hour worthwhile to you. I'm going to quickly go through a handful of slides to set the stage for our Q&A. There we go. You can tell by the cover of the book and General Deptula's opening that our book is about the Predator program, but more specifically, the origins of the Joint Air Force CIA program, which is probably the worst kept secret in America. Let us stress, we don't consider it a CIA program or an Air Force program. It was a joint effort. Our story is of not just the technology, but more importantly about the people that made it happen. We've tried to recognize as many people as we could. They are the reason for the program's success, not Alec or me. I know many of them are attending this virtual event today. Welcome to you all. Slide. So why are we the ones telling the story? It could be our ignorance, our stupidity, or bullheaded determination to take the task on. As General Deptula alluded to, Alec and I were lucky enough to be the day-to-day link between the CIA and the Air Force between 2000 and 2002. Alec was the program manager for the CIA, and I was the lead Air Force action officer turned operations officer for the Air Force's Expeditionary Air Intelligence Squadron, which would become the first armed Predator squadron. While Michael couldn't join us today, without him, we would still have just a bunch of our stories. He helped turn our rambling stories into vignettes, then into chapters, and finally a book. Thanks, Michael. Another unique aspect of this book is we alternate chapters between Alec and me telling the story. This allowed us to both show the CIA and Air Force viewpoints, at least from the trenches. It also permitted us to utilize the first person in telling the story, which would put the security review burden solely on us and no one else. Slide, please. To set the stage, I want to go back in time. Before the summer of 2000, The Predator operations concept was to deploy 2 to 4 Predator aircraft and a robust team to an established base. Slide. In 2000, political constraints required us to modify that construct to having only a small launch team forward of less than 10 people and an operation team thousands of miles away. We called this split operations. Slide. Once we armed the platform, more political realities required us to bring the mission operations team back to the United States. While this seems trivial today, this technological leap was the impetus for the revolution. We called this remote split operations. Slide. The next 2 stories kind of cover the period of the book. And you'll see here, it lists some accomplishments of the Joint Air Force CIA team, supported by many others, especially NEMA and NSA personnel. In 2000, we developed tactics, techniques, and procedures to sneak a small Predator aircraft into Afghanistan, survive MiGs and SAMs, and use all source analysis to meet the president's objective: get actionable intelligence on Osama bin Laden. Slide. Based on lessons from 2000, we linked our program to the Air Force's nascent Predator weaponization program and accelerated it. Listed on the slide are several new capabilities we added to the Predator. None of these would have been possible without the great teamwork and tireless efforts of Big Safari, Redstone Arsenal, and General Atomics, and many others. I'm not sure if you can make it out, but in the upper middle picture, yes, there's a picture of Snake Clark mounted on a watermelon in the back of an SUV awaiting a Hellfire missile at China Lake. We didn't have the budget for ballistic gel like the Mythbusters TV show, so we used the best we had. We had begun preparations for another deployment when the attacks of 9/11 occurred. We quickly redeployed and returned to flight operations over Afghanistan on 17 September 2001. On the first night of OEF, we demonstrated our armed capability. Over the next 5 months, we improved our tactics, techniques, and procedures, shot many Hellfire missiles, supported many operations, developed more counterterrorism and Taliban targets, and took the fight beyond Afghanistan. I think we're most proud of our mission supporting the joint team in their struggle to fight and survive on Taqa Gar in March of 2002. Slide. Most of the individuals of this combined team of officers, civilians, enlisted and contractors went on to do many great things. Some are still in the fight today. I think most will say this time was their proudest and most rewarding time in their careers. It certainly was for me and Alec. While our technology hangs in the Smithsonian in the form of Tale 3034, our story is about the people that made it happen, their teamwork, patriotism, and persistence. Speaking of persistence, while we really don't cover it in the book, a side story is what it took us to get the book cleared through the CIA and the Department of Defense. It took twice as long to get the book cleared as the operational time covered in the book. Every time we were met with an obstacle and it seemed that no one would help, we reminded ourselves, never mind, we'll do it ourselves, and pressed ahead. Had we not begun to execute a lawsuit, we still would not have a book today. Over the years, Alec and I joked that we'd be cellmates one day and he'd have dibs on the bunk of choice. So far, we've avoided that. We've been close sometimes, but still avoided it. I couldn't ask for a better cellmate. He's always covered for my shortfalls and much, much more. So thank you, Alec. One final note to our teammates. You are the reason we wrote this book. Your families deserve to know what you did for our nation. We hope we did your story justice. Thank you. I look forward to your questions, and Alec, over to you for your comments.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, General Deptula and Camilla, for putting this together, giving us the opportunity to kind of highlight the book, highlight the story through the Mitchell Institute. It's really a good honor for us. And looking through some of the participants, a lot of familiar names from back in the day. Honestly, we think it's an important story. and we always have, but we weren't sure we were ever going to be able to tell it. There's been a fair amount written, and some accurate, some not. Piecing it all together for a program that we didn't spend a lot of time writing things down on. We were more focused on mission accomplishment. We think this helps round out what's already out there and creates a pretty compelling picture for the reality of how the program came to be. Just briefly, for background, I started in the Army as a counterintelligence special agent. Went to DIA, worked as an intelligence officer doing analysis on terrorism facilities worldwide. After Khobar Towers and the East Africa Embassy bombings, got pulled into a joint cell on the joint staff side, along with others from DIA, CIA, and other organizations. And really the goal at that point was to help you leverage intelligence out of CIA and other places to support the targeting effort. So, and I transitioned from there to CIA, became a case officer, and finished out my my government service at CIA. After that, I've been working in the commercial world doing risk mitigation programs and still touching a couple of technology programs, and including some of the evolutions of these. People ask why I was involved in this program versus somebody else of a more traditional CIA flavor. And we joke in the book that it's because I failed to duck, but I think it was really the experience that I had on the DoD and the Pentagon side to be able to add context to the CIA pieces of this. At the time before 9/11, there wasn't a strong background in officers with military experience within the Counterterrorism Center. So it fell to me as designated by my bosses at the time, Rich Blee, Cofer Black, Charlie Allen, and then ultimately George Tennant. So the story, as Mark pointed out, it's about the team. We told it first person. We take responsibility for what's in here. Michael Marks turned what would have been a fairly dry academic approach into hopefully an entertaining one. I think the period of time we cover from 2000 to 2002-3 is really relevant from the development perspective. And we're eager for the feedback. We'll know we'll get some criticisms and some kudos, and we'll welcome both, and hopefully try to account for our time through the stories that we've told. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank friends, families, coworkers for helping us put this together. I think, as Mark pointed out, writing the story was almost as daunting as performing the function. So I know my wife Charlene would endured quite a bit, as did everybody's spouse. So with that, eager to get into questions and help out, lay out what's in the story.
Hey, well, great, gentlemen. Thanks very much to both of you for your comments. So let's dig into some of the points that you hit on, but let's go on into them in a little bit of detail. I'm going to direct my questions to one of you, but of course, let's do this as a discussion-like as we can and jump in if you got something to add or say. So Mark, first and foremost, you've conveyed, excuse me, your passion on the evolution of Predator and RPAs more broadly during our discussions and interactions over our careers. Why did you decide to write this particular book, and why do it as a collaborative effort?
Well, we knew we had a bunch of great memories and a bunch of great stories. And we knew there was a lot of stuff that out there that just wasn't, I won't say it wasn't untrue, it just didn't have the full picture. And we knew the people that were involved were great people that had done great things, and the story needed to be told. I mean, we have good lessons about how air power can be used and some of the challenge you have with that. Story about teamwork, persistence, innovation, and rapid technology development, because we certainly did a lot of that. Simple problem solving, and really, time and again, not to take no for an answer. But, I never thought about telling this story without Alec. And I don't think he ever thought about writing this alone either. because we felt it was a team from the beginning. And we knew the story would not be a complete perspective if you didn't have the Air Force and the CIA perspectives in it. And finally, we just thought we had a good news story. And there's so much out there that's bad news. We were like, hey, let's see if we can get something good out there. I'm sure Alex got some perspective on that as well.
Well, that's great. Let me give a bit of a follow-up. What can you tell us about the unique title of Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves?
It's kind of been our battle cry. The origins really started after we got the actionable intelligence on bin Laden, and then that the intel wasn't actioned on. And we certainly didn't want that to happen again. You know, some people would look at that title from a standpoint of arrogance or something like that. And we certainly had to convince our publisher it was the right title of the book. For us, it's about persistence and never taking no for an answer, and always finding a solution if you've got a significant problem. And then telling others, if you can't help us and don't want to be part of the solution, then we'll just figure it out ourselves and we won't give up. I'm not sure if anyone saw it on the slide deck or not, but that motto is on our unit coin. And it's just been time and again through the whole publishing of the book process too, that even today we remind ourselves to never mind, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, well, I will throw in there that many of us in the military that have been frustrated with the system certainly associates with that title. And I just hope that many of the younger folks in the military will read it and take away some important lessons, because without that perseverance and persistence, there's not a lot worthwhile that'll get done. That's also what happened in the planning of Operation Desert Storm, but that's another story for another day in my book. But I'm still waiting for a couple of people to die before I write it, because I don't want to piss them off. Anyway, Alec, Mark indicated there was substantial pressure from your organization to embargo the book as classified. What was it that resulted in a 39-month security review? And how did you finally get that resolved?
Yeah, to call it resistance or pressure would be a little bit of a polite way to put it. We thought writing the book would be hard. We thought doing the program would be hard. We didn't anticipate getting it cleared would be as difficult as it was. I mean, frankly, we signed in our stack of documents when, for me, when I went to CIA, saying that we had a lifelong obligation to have anything we write cleared. We could probably get away with a cookbook, not going through the process, but probably not much more than that. And we were both hypersensitive to the fact that obligation existed, and we wanted to honor it. The last thing we wanted to do was to write something that would aid the enemy. We wanted to protect the technologies. We wanted to protect the tactics, techniques, and procedures that evolved. And we think, 20 years after the fact, and talking the time frame that we are, and the approach that we took to writing it, we thought we were being pretty responsible with it. So we overcame, I think, a lot of the legitimate challenges. We couldn't overcome some of the bureaucratic or political ones. And that's what turned what should have been a 30, 60, 90-day process into a 39-month process. And the first response we got took almost a year, and it was in writing, and it stated that the very premise of the book was classified and it wouldn't be published, that it was fully and properly classified. We asked for a meeting. We got that several months later. And just for dramatic effect, they brought a printed version of Chapter 4 with the entire chapter redacted, except for the title. And I think, well, we've got some creative titles now. I think the title at that point was Chapter 4. So that was the only unclassified part of it. The last thing we wanted to do was get involved with an attorney and make this a legal issue, but we didn't feel we were getting due process. Kevin Carroll from Wigan and Dana in Washington shared our frustration after about a year of his effort, and a change of administration within the CIA for the publication review board helped a little bit. But it was really the, do we need to take this as a public issue, which was the last thing I wanted to see was, Bierbauer v. CIA on a lawsuit. So yeah, Kevin did a great job for us, got everybody to pay attention, got it elevated. And as a result, we got 95% of the book cleared. And the last 5% was curious for the most part. There were things about porta potties that were redacted. There was some locations and some authority issues which were appropriately redacted. And then, quotes like Alec sighed was for some reason classified. But and then the net effect is the book's coming out next week, and we are crystal clear at this point as to what we can talk about and what we can't, and feel like we've certainly met our obligation.
I don't feel like the Lone Ranger, Alec and Mark, because, we've got a new law out there that says 25 years after an event, if something's classified, it's automatically declassified. Well, it's 30 years after Desert Storm.
Yes,
and
sir.
for 4 years, I've been trying to get planning documents declassified. Nobody home. Anyway, again, for another day. Mark, why should airmen read this book, and what do you hope are the key takeaways?
Wow. I personally think there are so many things. First off, I hope that the airmen will find it an easy read and will enjoy the book. But we kind of wanted to just show that ordinary Americans, specifically airmen, for them, can do extraordinary things. As you mentioned, they just need to be persistent. And if you believe in something, find the people that will help you get to yes. Be good teammates, and the credit will take care of itself. To me, air power is more than just about airplanes. It's a mindset about finding innovative solutions to your complex problems. And for me, it's kind of a warning to those young airmen out there that you never know when the call will come to you, and will you be ready?
Very good. Nice, succinct message there. Find who will get you to yes. That's kind of key, because there are a million people out there that are going to say no. Alec, during the period that's covered by the book, what do you view as some of the biggest successes, as well as some of the biggest failures?
Failures, we had a few, and some successes as well. But and just to echo, Mark's comments, it was critically essential that we learn from our failures, that we not take no, not in a disrespectful way, but we not take no as our end state and move forward. Briefly, some of the biggest success operationally was we were charged with, in 9 months or less, find and fix bin Laden, put US eyes on target. And we did it. And in September of 2000, there was a screen capture in the slides at the beginning of when we found him at Tarnak Farms and just outside of Kandahar in September. Huge success. But I'd pair with that a failure that we couldn't close the finish part of that find, fix, finish loop, which emphasized the title of the book even more. But back on successes, the putting the team together, and certainly at the time I was a GS 13, 14. I'd come from a non-traditional path, and organizing on a day-to-day basis 12 different organizations from the U.S. government, as well as industry partners, was a phenomenal challenge and a huge success. It's not something that is traditionally done, certainly at CIA. There's oftentimes some organizational resistance to bring in outside elements, but and we had hundreds of people supporting in one form or fashion. And from my perspective, I often didn't know what organization they were from. they were just part of the team. They were there. They were doing their piece. And I also, for some bureaucratic reasons, we didn't allow anybody to wear uniforms while they were in our workspaces, and it was part of our operational security practice for the program. But I couldn't tell you who the junior people versus the mid-grade or senior people were on the team. They were all just part of the team. So that team was a phenomenal success, and frankly, we really see more of that. In a more detailed sense, lethality, Hellfire was not my first choice. I'm glad to see that I was wrong on the weapon, but we had some serious issues with lethality, and a huge success was sketched out on a cocktail napkin and implemented in very short order. And then remote split ops, which I think is probably, at least within the business, it's a household term these days, but there were failures along the way in putting that together. And there was some comms voodoo magic in there that made that possible. Huge success that continues today. Failures, just a couple other real quick points. Our first flight was a failure. There's a reason that checklists exist in the Air Force, and there's a reason that the CIA shouldn't try to alter those. Our first functional check flight at our deployed location crashed, or hard landing by Air Force terminology, I think is the right way to put it. Nevertheless, it didn't fly again, but it could have been the end of our program. That was a failure and a learning point, certainly for us not to mess with the checklist. We did have to brief the director on that, and I tried to ease the pain. I said, good news, bad news. Bad news is we crashed. Good news is the pilot's okay. And we were allowed to continue and live to fly the only other bird that we had. I think the next night. And then the last failure issue. It's a whole of government one, but 9/11, as Mark said, we were prepped to deploy, and we would have been operational, in September of 2001. Had 9/11 been a 10/11 or an 11/11, things might have gone different. But sometimes we weren't early enough to get back into the field.
Well, that's very good, and a great segue to what I'd like to ask Mark to elaborate a little more on right now, and that's what drove you guys to split ops and then remote split ops.
Well, as I kind of described in the slides, we obviously couldn't put our ground control station in the middle of Afghanistan, kind of like we had done in Tuzla, Bosnia, and other places. The Taliban wasn't going to invite us in. And the host country that we did get didn't want a large military presence, and we had to be as clandestine as possible. So we had to come up with some way to have a very small team forward without a military presence, and that's what drove us to that split operations and move our ops team to somewhere else. Then once we armed the platform, some more reality set in that the General Counsel and others came in and said that we would have to inform our host nation for our operations team that we were basically launching missiles from their country, even if the aircraft launched from another country. And that obviously wasn't going to work. That drove us for looking at many places, and we kind of outlined that process in the book, from looking to putting it on a ship, which wasn't my preference, to other locations, and then finally figuring out what the best location would be back in the United States. And that's what got us to remote split operations.
Oh, very good. Alec, it seems like some of the CIA restrictions necessitated the development of the ops concepts that we just discussed. What were the CIA's biggest challenges to this ops concept, and how were those policies and technologies balanced?
Well, I'll put on my CIA hat and thank you and take credit for the evolution of remote split ops on behalf of the agency. Although, yeah, as Mark noted, it was from a technology perspective, we put incredible burdens on the system because of just it's an institutional challenge of, what the agency's doing is supposed to be quiet. It's supposed to be clandestine. It's supposed to be behind the scenes. It's not supposed to be a large footprint. The whole concept of having a clandestine airfield is probably a little bit of an oxymoron, but we had to put that challenge in on, it was probably a very arbitrary 10 people or less, but it was driven by the fact that we couldn't put that full capability forward, and we had obligations to our host to keep this clandestine, and we certainly had obligations along that pipeline with some of the foreign relationships, the governments that we were interfacing with, to the extent that they were clued in at the time. Those were critical paths for us that drove some of the technology. The mantra at CIA is, what is the blowback potential? What is the consequence of things going wrong? And how are we going to overcome those? And that in some cases, there's a risk continuum there as you assess the blowback. And at the time in 2000, that risk, there was a fair amount of aversion to taking substantial risk, and that drove it. As Mark noted, we looked for every possible opportunity to the concept of putting that dish on a ship didn't get legs for very long, thankfully, but that would have been, from our perspective, that would have taken one of our host challenges out of play. So the ability, though, to pull back that real-time video, not just somebody saying that something was so, but to put real-time video into CIA headquarters, into the Pentagon, frankly, at times into the White House, was I think the convincing factor that this full cycle was viable.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Follow up for you. There's always been a working relationship between DoD and CIA. Current hot topic is a potential move by the SecDef to pull back on military support to the CIA. What's your perspective on this, and how would programs like this be impacted?
Well, if that support wasn't there in the very basic sense, this program wouldn't exist. If that pullback was truly put into effect in an absolute sense, for us, we were driven, and it's a memo that we never thought would see the light of day, but from a briefing with President Clinton, Sandy Berger signed out a memo as a national security advisor saying, do more, take Pentagon capabilities, primarily technical in the context of the memo, and take CIA authorities and put the two together and do something good. Give me more capability in Afghanistan. I mean, we detail that in the book in a little bit more detail than we'll cover here. But that relationship is absolutely essential. The CIA does certain things well, and DoD does certain things well, and those functions ought to be left to whoever does them well, and where they're dependent on each other. That really needs to continue to happen. It sounds trite, but it's a follow the money issue at some sense, that there's budget implications involved. But it would be ineffective from a budget perspective, and probably from a performance perspective, to move that money to CIA and expect them to have all the organic capabilities that they currently leverage off of DoD. We spent a lot of time talking about Title 50 versus Title 10. And in a very, very brief sense, intelligence versus military operations, and CIA operates primarily under Title 50 in these circumstances. Mark and I tried to create a Title 60 and blend the two. We thought it was that simple. Turns out it wasn't. But yeah, to the issue of current day relationships, it'll certainly ebb and flow on that DoD CIA relationship and support, but it's essential.
Oh, very well said. Mark, given the interagency nature of the ops team, as Alec just described, what were your biggest command and control challenges, and how did you overcome them?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we have some rough patches within in 2000 and in early 2001, especially due to some of those funding issues. That crash of that first aircraft, I never thought it would drive some of our C2 discussions and our legal discussions on, especially once we started talking about arming the platform on, okay, if this person's in the left seat or in the right seat or whatever, it's going to drive that, and which will also drive if something bad happens, who's going to pay for an airplane? And it was amazing the complicated proposals that the lawyers came up with that I was going to have to deal with as the operations officer, and Alec was going to have to deal with as the ops lead for the CIA.
Let me interrupt right there and correct you, because no, it's not amazing what happens when the lawyers get involved. Okay, go ahead.
Roger that, sir. Luckily, the Air Force leadership and CIA leadership had good vision and just said, let's go halvesies. And we kind of outlined that in the book. And that allowed us to exercise some simpler solutions, especially when it came to who would be on the crew when. Once OEF began, it became even more complex. The decision was made at the highest level that the CIA would maintain control of the platform and its use. But we knew there would be valid military targets to execute. So we, as best we could from the trenches, tried to develop TTPs on how, and I'll use the term tactical control, would be exercised from within CENTCOM, SOCOM, and the CFAC, especially should we need to use our strike capability or our ability to support other strikes. We also developed collection management processes, so those same organizations could leverage our unique collection capabilities. The key was we needed to have the right L&Os in the right locations to work the friction that arose. And there were many. And we outline a lot of that in the book, especially the L&Os between Alec and I had the worst job, to me, the worst job to this day, because sometimes we got very heated and animated. And we certainly had a great L&O at your location to help us. In the end, was what we set up perfect? No way, not at all. We learned a lot of things and we learned them on the fly. But we did our best given the many masters we had, our short timelines, and the security constraints that really hampered some of our ability to get the word out on what we could do. Many times on the radio as our pilots were trying to help somebody on the ground, and we trying to, as best we can, let them know that we were an RPA with a weapons capability, and what? Trust me, we can help you. So it certainly had some challenges, but we got through them for the most part.
Yeah, well, as you know, I got a million stories from the other end, but command relationships that first night of October 7th, 2001, kind of threw a monkey wrench into things, but I'll save that for another day. It appears that you guys made many technological advancements in a real short period of time. It was less than 18 months for remote split ops, weaponization, rover, weapons modification, SIGINT, and situational awareness tools for the GCS, a ground control station for the layman in the audience, to name a few. How were you able to make that happen? And what are some of your biggest takeaways?
The interesting part is we never looked at the totality of all that until we started
Right in the
putting
book.
together and putting an outline together. And we were like, wow, there was a lot of stuff that was accomplished. And most of it, frankly, it wasn't like we were at the beginning, we developed a project and we had these tasks and we knew we were to need these. A lot of it arose from just the problems getting set forth in front of us. The split ops and remote split ops are a great example. Those were based on, yep, we want to do this, we want to conduct operations, but here are some constraints that are going to drive us to that. Some of the other capabilities were the same way. Some of them were born of some things we finally got on the Predator. A good example of that is the SIGINT capability. When I was in the 11th Reconnaissance Squadron, there was some testing done in the 90s that there's no way you can do SIGINT on a Predator. Can't put the antennas on the wings, can't do that, etc. Well, we knew we needed to get a better capability to get more situational awareness on the Taliban air and air defenses. We learned that kind of the hard way in our 2000 operations. And the experts said it couldn't be done. But you know what? The kids working with me, they could come up with some innovative solutions. So for about $20, they made it happen. They figured out a way to use the new radio, because up until we started operations, we didn't have a radio to talk with the folks on the ground or in the air. We had to use you probably remember in the Balkan days, we had to use a VTC capability to do that, and it was a nightmare. So once we got the aircraft on board, and especially, in the 2000 mindset, we weren't going to have anybody to talk to. So why don't we use that to listen to the bad guys? As simple as that. And for $20, we made it happen. And, it's the old adage, perfection is the enemy of good enough. And that was certainly a good enough. And a lot of our solutions weren't necessarily pretty. Maybe a lot of duct tape and zip ties to make it happen. But we just chose not to make the problems harder than they needed to be, and simplify the solutions. And so a lot of the things you saw on the list of the slides, that's a lot of them were that. I could go on and on about Rover and other things, but that's kind of how we got to where we were.
Yeah, well, I can relate being in the KAOC, watching the information coming directly into us, and then having to relay over radio to the shooters and try to talk their eyes onto the picture that we're seeing that's being fed to us by the Pred. Now, obviously, we've come a long way since then. And Alec was talking about earlier when you guys found bin Laden. We didn't have that finish piece on the aircraft. And I think that's something that people miss, is that the real revolution of uninhabited aircraft is the combination of the fine fix finish elements onto one platform. And that if we had this thing weaponized at the time that the dude showed up way back there in 2000, a lot could have been avoided by taking him out then. Back to you, Alec, and speaking of 2000, you were operating in Afghanistan about that time. And it was about that same time that the Air Force was looking at exploring weaponization of the Predator. So can you tell us a little bit about how these two concepts got linked?
Yes, sir. Born of necessity at that point, when the concept was put on the table of, well, why don't we weaponize Predator? It sounded, from a CIA perspective, sounded a little frightening. And then as we dug into the details and realized we'd be constrained to about 100 pounds of payload on the wing, you start looking within the inventory to see what's available. But the triggering event for it was finding bin Laden, not being able to do something about it. We had a robust discussion about whether we could kamikaze the Predator, But the loss link profile would save the aircraft from doing it. And I'm not sure what the kinetic effects of bumping into somebody at lawnmower speed would do anyway. But we looked, big safari, when you got guys like Bill Grimes at the time, bringing capability and certainly, when we got Redstone Arsenal and Huntsville involved from an Army side, when the Air Force inventory didn't really carry anything small enough to fit on the wings, Hellfire came to the surface fairly quickly. And then, with guys like Snake Clark pushing it from the Pentagon side, I think all told it was $500,000 in 60 days to get that program going. And on a traditional program, you wouldn't have the PowerPoint briefing put together to pitch it probably in 60 days for $500,000. And then getting the Army side on Redstone was kind of new to us at that point. We had some relationships there, but we got the same teamwork from them of setting aside bureaucracies and budgets, and they wanted to participate. We're eager to do so, and it came together.
Very good. Let's switch topics just a little bit here. Mark, over the years, there have been lots of discussions of RPAs in contested environments. Now, you successfully operated with a potential air threat, radar and infrared SAMs, and a AAA environment. So tell us a little bit about your perspectives on this topic.
Yes, sir. And, in the book, we talk about some of those. We detail in great detail at least one of our MiG engagement would probably be a strong word, especially if I mentioned it to you, sir, at least encounters. But we successfully survived that. Also in the book, we outline another successful survival of a radar-guided SA-3 system for us just prior to the conduct for OEF to start. I obviously had a little bit of experience of this. And when I left the program and went back into the white world, I would be in meetings and the discussion of RPAs and contested or semi-contested would come up, and people would say, "Oh, you can't do that, you can't do that." And I cringed. And it was funny, if there were people in the room that knew me, they would just look at my face and just kind of laugh and move on. And then I would try to explain that what it requires is linking the right intelligence sources and analysts with the right planners and pilots. And if you do that, you can make it happen. So, sir, I remember back as a young lieutenant in the Cold War, and Ivan was 10 feet tall, right? And the threat was high. But we knew we had to figure a way to get into and win the fight. We had to find either gaps or seams, or make those gaps and seams in the defenses so we could get to the targets. And I looked at it as no different for these RPAs, especially when, depending on the commander's perspective, what is the attrition threshold for them? And it was certainly tough for us when you only had 1 or 2 aircraft, but we're certainly beyond that now. And I was involved in some of the testing at the Nellis Range Complex with Predator. We flew it against some of the emitters out there. And I can tell you that Predator is not going to survive over the Nellis Range Complex. We got some of the best operators in the world, or over any of the other first world capitals or high priority targets. But maybe, just maybe, with some good intelligence analysis, some good mission planning, you can accomplish missions that others may not think is possible. And it doesn't hurt if you have a third-rate adversary to go up against. I will say that. And that was our team's perspective. We had great intel people, great planners, and great pilots that made it happen.
Well, very good. And thank you both for your insights. Your comments reinforce the need for planners, operators, the scientific and technology community, and industry to work closely together to create next generation force multipliers. Valkyrie comes to mind as one. So Alec and Mark, on behalf of the Mitchell Institute of Aerospace Studies and all of the AFA, thanks for your service to our nation and your pivotal role in a key revolution in the history of the United States Air Force, as well as the CIA. Now, as a reminder to our listeners, our next Aerospace Nation event is going to be Tuesday, January 26th, when I'll be talking with General James Dickinson, Commander of U.S. Space Command. And I'd also like to mention that the links about the book and the slides from today's event will shortly be available on our website at mitchellaerospacepower.org. So now we're going to turn to questions from the audience who've been listening to the conversation. And those of you who are out there want to ask a question, please use the raise hand function. And when I call on you, unmute your mic and state your name and affiliation before asking. And we had one, and now she just went away, but I also have a bunch of comments and Q&A in the text function. And so let me start with a question from Tom Hazelbeck. Have any of the lessons learned from this experience been incorporated into setting up new programs, or are we relearning these lessons to this day?
I'll tackle that from what I believe of the Air Force, at least throughout my career. I mean, we used and built upon all the things that we did, especially from a technology perspective. You know, we took, obviously, we painted all the Preds that became gray after that point. Rover just exploded. I remember my time at Absent, and just fielding as many of those capabilities out. Especially the folks on the ground was a huge piece. And I would say some of the all source capabilities that we brought, the other sensors. So yeah, we've expanded on it. Some of them, that was a challenge for both Alec and I, and even after I left the program, keeping an eye on things to make sure they were making their way out of the program. Some of them took longer than I thought. I used to cringe when I was at Nellis when they would they were only carrying one Hellfire missile because of what they thought was that they were over max weight, and we had already flown at that weight load before and successfully done takeoffs and landings. So I was kind of trying to push the tech data out of Big Safari and into Air Combat Command. So I think we did our best, and I think we're continuing to evolve. So Alec, you may have some on the agency side of the house.
Yeah, I think just briefly, I think we talked the relationship between DoD, CIA, and I think that's it has ebbed and flowed as it relates to programs such as this. I want to believe in the program in 2003 and going back into the field, but I saw it from the ground side in Afghanistan then, and certainly saw that loop being closed, and I hope certainly that continues. It continues today.
Very good. Let's turn to Dave Anhalt. Dave.
Okay, Dave Anhalt. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a private consultant in the Washington, D.C. area, but I have a question about, given the fact that one of the advantages of using RPAs in the way you did is it provides the planners the advantage of executing risky missions without risking human life, a pilot. For now, not talking about our adversary, but that advantage of RPAs seems obvious. So I have two questions. Question number one is, just exactly what have been the statistics that you're aware of the exchange ratio of going on risky missions with Hellfires? How many unfortunate losses of RPAs did we get that sort of underlie the fact that, God, it could have been a pilot that got lost there, but it was an RPA with a Hellfire instead? And number two, aside from that clear advantage of RPAs, if you had to give a list of the top 3 reasons why we ought to have RPAs doing this type of job, as compared to the other elegant things that are in the Air Force inventory? What are those three things?
Take a stab at it first, Alec. So
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
can't tell you specifically any statistics on that. I can tell you it certainly was in our cross-check on every mission that we had, especially if Alec had good intelligence for whatever the high priority target of the day was. And, especially with the Predator, it's very susceptible to weather kinds of conditions as well as threats. And so that was always in our calculus, but we also knew we didn't have to worry about there being a pilot in the seat to do it. But I will also say, for us back in the day, we only had a couple of air vehicles at our disposal at the forward area, and so that was as much a challenge for us. So I think it's just, that's where commanders command, and getting good guidance from for an airman from the CFAC on what his acceptable level of risk is in accomplishing the missions. I think you need to have that clearly defined for RPAs, just like you do manned aircraft, and you execute it in that way. Alec, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, the very inception of the program was driven by a landlocked country without a CSAR combat search and rescue capability to be able to put manned aircraft over Afghanistan at that point in time. And it drove this opportunity for an unmanned platform. It was the right capability for that specific environment. It's not for every environment. This should not be, my perspective should not be seen as a plug and play. It solves all mission sets. Certainly from an agency perspective, there's other platforms, both ground and air, that are better used for certain missions. The statistics piece I can't address. And, I think, and Hellfire as well, right in a context, and it's certainly evolved in other weapon systems now, but that the pairing was right for us, but certainly not right in all circumstances.
Okay, a last question and comment from someone who I think you'll recognize, General John Campbell. Here's his comment first. A lot's been written about the program. As Mark said, it's the worst kept secret in the world. However, for the most part, none of the articles and books ever went through the security review process, so they don't help the discussion. Thanks to you guys for going through the 39-month agony of the security review, because you've established a baseline for what we can talk about. Now, here's his question. The multi-agency, multi-int fusion cell was a key to the success of the program. Can you talk about the planning that went into the mission on which bin Laden was located?
I'll take that one, if you don't mind, sir. And thank you, General Campbell, and certainly your contributions are heavy into the success of this program, both because you spoke agency and Air Force at the time, and could translate for me, my leadership, and vice versa on the other side. Mission 8 was when we found bin Laden, and we had a human tipper, a piece of intelligence from a source that indicated the area that bin Laden might be in. We had doctrine's got to come from somewhere, and I think that's a theme that across a lot of the evolutions and the lessons learned that we had. But doing real-time collections management for a dynamic platform like this was something that evolved over time. We pulled representatives in from every organization that had a dog in the fight and a reason to be at the table, and that allowed us to integrate that human intelligence with, the analysts and some of Mark's analysts at the time to say, if we're going to pinpoint somebody, at a place and time, and it was a Friday, well, let's find the mosques. What mosques is he likely to be associated with at that particular, in that geographic region? And we had some thoughts on some buildings that might be used for prayers, and that put us over target. And then there was a little bit of luck involved in that, but that tasking cell and that mission planning, it started pre-flight, where are we going today? And it continued throughout the duration of that flight and many, many others, adjusting for weather, adjusting for intel, adjusting for threats. And we had one of our engagements, shortly after that sighting on Mission 8. But and that community contribution to the collection management piece continued and evolved extremely well after that. But we kept everybody at the table that needed to be there.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of Mitchell Institute's discussion of the development of the Predator as a clandestine interagency ISR and strike capability rollout of Nevermind, We'll Do It Ourselves. It's available via Amazon or other distributors. And I've got to tell you, it was real special to have Alec and Mark with us today. You guys' comments gave great insights into how interagency programs can and perhaps should work, as well as how to rapidly innovate. So thank you both for joining us. So from all of us here at Mitchell Institute, have a great aerospace power kind of day. Out here.
Thank you, sir.